72 Echo X-ray, Burbank Tower, Burbank altimeter 3019, Burbank class Charlie, surface area is IFR, stay intentions.
Yes, we can maintain special VFR action for special VFR transition on the 101 westbound 2.
November 2 Echo X-ray, hold outside Burbank class Charlie airspace. I have an aircraft going around.
2 Echo X-ray holding.
Because there were takeoffs and landings, I guess, happening at Burbank at that time. Is that why he had to hold?
Burbank, Van Nuys, obviously LAX, constant, right? So there's a lot of air traffic in the area, and because he's in a very congested airspace, he's talking to the controller, and he wants to go through the Burbank airport's airspace, and the air traffic controller is saying, not yet, hold.
It's going to be a little bit. I got a citation on a 9-mile final, and then the go around that I just had is going to be turning base to final in about 3 minutes.
Okay, we'll continue holding 2 Echo X-ray.
So here the air traffic controller is telling him what other traffic is in the immediate area and describing to him traffic that he may see and that needs to be avoided. And then the pilot acknowledges that transmission.
November 2 Echo X-ray, and for your planning purposes, you can expect to transition to the north side of the airport. I just spoke with Van Nuys on the line, and they've got multiple IFR departures coming off of runway 16, so you can expect to follow the 5 north and cross that way.
2 Echo X-ray, no problem.
Okay, so the air traffic controller is assuming that the pilot is in visual conditions and can see the interstate, the 5 north, and he's again describing the air traffic in the area and telling him how he's going to avoid that traffic by following the 5 north to the north side of the Burbank Airport and the Van Nuys Airport.
317 pop-up Burbank Tower. You can expect a few minutes. I got a special VFR helicopter I need to get transitioning. He's been holding for about 15 minutes. South, northwest, follow the 5 freeway, maintain special VFR conditions at or below 2,500.
Maintain special VFR at or below 2,500 I-5 northbound 2 Echo X-ray.
Number 2 Echo X-ray, roger, and you're cleared through Burbank class Charlie surface area from the southeast to the northwest.
Copy that, we'll maintain special VFR, copter 2 Echo X-ray.
So that is the Burbank controller telling the helicopter, again, to follow the Interstate 5 north of the airport, and to maintain visual conditions, special visual conditions, not instrument conditions. Right? So he's not authorized to fly into clouds at that point.
But special VFR is a little bit different than regular VFR, right?
There are different rules, but it's still visual. So he's got to be able to see outside. He can't fly into clouds. He has to maintain certain distances from the clouds. And as you just heard, he was instructed to follow the freeway. So he's got to be able to see the ground. Right?
X-ray, for your transition to Camarillo, did you just want to follow the 118?
118, and then we'll loop around Van Nuys to catch the 101 2 Echo X-ray.
Number 2 Echo X-ray, roger.
All right, so here, again, more highways in Southern California, the 118, the 101, and the helicopter, the instructions from air traffic control in the controlled airspace are to follow those, and the helicopter is acknowledging that he can see and follow those. All right, so here, the Burbank controller gave Kobe's helicopter instructions to follow the interstate, so that he's got to be able to see it in visual conditions, and he changed his frequency. In other words, he told him to talk to the next controller, and he terminated radar service. So that means he's outside of the controlled airspace for the Burbank Airport. He's going to go talk to the controller at the Van Nuys Airport, the next town over that has an airport, and he's going to maintain visual conditions and follow the highway.
Van Nuys helicopter 2 Echo X-ray with you for the special VFR transition. We are currently at 1400.
Helicopter 72 Echo X-ray, Van Nuys Tower, wind calm, visibility 2 1/2, ceiling 1,100 overcast, Van Nuys altimeter 3016. Cleared into Van Nuys class Delta, northeast of Van Nuys along the 118 freeway westbound. Advise when you're in VFR conditions or when you're clear of the Van Nuys class Delta. Transition at or below 2,500 permitting.
2 Echo X-ray, advise in VFR condition, and then we'll stay on the 118. We're currently at 1400, and we have 0235.
Helicopter 2 Echo X-ray, thank you. And once you're clear Van Nuys Delta, did you want to talk to SoCal?
Affirmative, 2 Echo X-ray.
Okay, there's a lot going on there, but he's talking to the next controller at Van Nuys. She's giving him the weather. She's telling him where the ceilings are. She's telling him to maintain that special visual condition and to let her know when he is out of the special visual condition and into visual conditions completely. Now, he's not authorized to go into instrument conditions. He's not authorized to go into the clouds, in other words. He's got to maintain the special VFR, the special clearance. Again, she's telling him to follow the highway, so he's got to be able to see that highway visually. And she's asking him, do you want to talk to the next controller? Because once he leaves controlled airspace, he's not required to talk to the next controller. But he says, yes, I do want to talk to the next controller when I'm outside of the restricted controlled airspace.
Tower 42 Echo X-ray, can we go ahead and start turning to the southwest course to 11?
Helicopter 2 Echo X-ray, approved. And are you transitioning in VFR condition?
VFR condition 1,500, 2 Echo X-ray.
Helicopter 2 Echo X-ray, thank you. Contact SoCal now 134.2 for flight following 34-2.
34-2.
So here he wants,
right?
yeah, so he wants to turn to the south and follow the other highway. And the controller asks him specifically, are you in visual conditions? And he says specifically, yes, I am. She says, very good. Talk to the next controller at SoCal, Southern Cal approach, and she gives him the frequency to call that controller. And so he's going to switch frequencies, and then he's going to call the SoCal controller next and talk to him. And this is the last controller he's going to talk to.
X-ray ident.
So here we're only hearing half of the conversation. We're hearing the SoCal controller acknowledge the transmission from Kobe's helicopter, and he's saying, he's giving the call sign, Echo X-ray ident, and he's saying, show me where you are on radar. There's a button in the cockpit that the pilot can push that makes the radar hit kind of bloom and gives a signal to the controller. It's not unusual that we're not able to hear the pilot because the controller in SoCal approach has receivers, like microphones, all over the place so that the transmissions to the controller are seamless. So if there's a hill in the way or there's interference, there's microphones on that radio frequency where the pilots can talk to the controllers without interruption. But the microphone recording this was not able to hear the pilot. So the controller can hear the pilot, but the recording for this video could not hear the pilot. So that's the difference. And people may make the mistake of thinking that the pilot either wasn't talking to that controller or that there was an interference or that he was too low and shouldn't have been there, okay? That's not necessarily true. It's just that the microphone that was recording this transmission couldn't hear the pilot. But the pilot was definitely talking to the controller, and the controller could definitely hear the pilot because you can hear the controller's end of the conversation. It's like hearing only half of a phone call, right? And recording only half of a phone call. On this recording, only half of the phone call is there.
Okay.
But the other half was definitely happening because the controller was talking to him, okay? Until a certain point, obviously, and then it becomes obvious when he doesn't respond.
X-ray, yeah, you're still on a 1200 code. Are you requesting flight following?
So again, you can't hear the other half of the conversation, but he's talking to Kobe's helicopter. The air traffic controller is talking to Kobe's helicopter, and he's saying, here's the code I have for you, 1200. That's a general visual code. And he's asking, do you want flight following? What do you want me to do, in other words? What are you asking for? And we can only hear the controller's half of that conversation.
Echo X-ray, what do you say intentions?
So again, only the controller's half of the conversation, and he's saying, say intentions. In other words, where are you going, what are you doing, how are you going to get there? And presumably, the pilot responded with his intentions, that he was going to Thousand Oaks. But again, we're only hearing half of the conversation.
2 Echo X-ray, you're still too low level for flight following at this time.
Okay, so the helicopter, it's apparent to me, asked for flight following, asked for the controller to help him out and keep him clear of other traffic and keep an eye on him. But he was too low for, the controllers have rules on when they can do that, on when they can issue flight following, when they can give those instructions. He was too low for that at that point, and that's all we know from that transmission, right? He was too low for flight following, but he didn't tell him that he was too low to the ground, that he didn't tell him anything else, just that you're too low for flight following. So we can't surmise anything other than that from that half of the conversation.
At what point do we see that rapid descent?
So you're not going to be able to see it on this version,
right,
but it's been reported that the radar hits come about every 6 seconds, 10 times a minute. So what you would see is an altitude, and then 6 seconds later, a much lower altitude, and then 6 seconds later, a much lower altitude. Depending on how many hits it was for, you would see that. It may have only been for 1 or 2 hits, 6 or 12 seconds, when the altitude goes down significantly. But I don't have that information on this recording.
But when the controller is saying that you're too low, at that point he probably already dropped significantly, right?
Not necessarily. You'd have to know the controller's rules for flight following.
Okay.
Right? He could have been at the same altitude he was at before. He's just too low for flight following. So you can't draw any conclusions from that except exactly what the controller said. You're too low for flight following, right? And helicopters typically fly low, right? That's what they're designed for, to get into and out of places where airplanes cannot go. And so, again, we can't draw any conclusions from that other than he was too low for flight following.
So too low could mean 100 feet, or it could mean 1,000 feet, or it could be anything.
We don't know at this point. There are rules, and again, that's part of the NTSB's investigation, is going to determine what altitude is too low for flight following, right? And was that instruction appropriate? And we don't know that right now. And then there's, at this point in the recording, if you hit play again, there's a note that comes up and says radar contact lost. And what that means is what I just talked about. Every 6 seconds there's a radar hit, and it's the code of the airplane and its altitude are being looked at by the air traffic controllers. And at this point, that radar contact is no longer there. And that we can infer a couple things. Either one, he was too low for the radar to see him, or he was too low for anyone to see him and he hit the ground at that point. Right? And correlating the last radar position with where the crash site happens is something, again, that's going to be done as part of the investigation.
2 Echo X-ray, SoCal.